Welcome to everyone on both sides of the Atlantic to a very special occasion, an occasion which is bound to be both glad and sad, because we're celebrating the publication of Kate Bosher's Greek Theatre in Ancient Sicily. And so at the same time as celebrating that, we're bound to remember with sadness the early death of a rising star in scholarship and a wonderful person. I just want to start with two very memorable personal experiences. The first was in 2008. Kate had been in touch with me ever since she was a student in Toronto, and wanted to organize a conference on theatre outside Athens, drama in Greek Sicily and South Italy. And she, a Canadian, and I, a Brit, organized a date in November 2008. And what neither of us realized was that it was the week of the presidential election. And so Chicago was, to put it mildly, quite a thrilling and distracted place. There was a center of attention apart from our conference. And I do remember the most wonderful evening in Kate and Dale's apartment as the results came in and it became quite clear that Barack Obama had won. And I remember Sara was down at the park in the center of Chicago, actually hearing his victory speech live. So that's my first memorable, wonderful memory of Chicago then. And over the next few years, Kate was an absolutely exemplary editor of the book, Theatre Outside Athens, that came out of that conference. Now, my second memory, inevitably, was in March 2013, when I got an email from Justine McConnell, a totally unexpected email, breaking the news that Kate had died. And it seemed at the time, and it still seems so wrong somehow, that somebody so talented, somebody so dedicated, somebody so utterly likable should have died so young. It's more than 8 years ago now, and yet it's still a very keen sorrow. And well, Kate Bosher was one of those the gods love. So those are my two memories, one of Kate so alive and the other the memory of Kate. And I'm going to hand over now to Edith Hall and Clemente Marconi, who have been the editors, the diligent editors, who have managed to bring out the book that she left ready but unpublished, Greek Theatre in Ancient Sicily. So shall I hand over first to Edith?
Thank you so much, Oliver, for that very thoughtful and very authentic feeling introduction. It is difficult, actually. I'm surprised how difficult I'm finding it now. It is such a bittersweet, to use Sappho's word, bittersweet moment for all of us, because what wouldn't we all do to see her lovely face pop up on the screen? Perhaps she's smiling at us from somewhere. When she did die in 2013, I too will never ever forget it, because it was in the middle of, paradoxically, ironically, whatever, a conference I was organising with Rosie Wiles on female classical scholars, the last of whom was born in 1913. They had to be dead to be discussed at this conference, and it was just such an extraordinary moment to receive the news, which is why we have dedicated that book partly to her. When that one finally came out. And that's typical of Kate's presence, coming up in all sorts of extraordinary places. I mean, she was the brightest and best young woman of her generation as a classicist. And she dies halfway through this conference. I had known that she was ill. I had no idea how ill. She'd been so determined to carry on, and Dale knows far more about that than any of us, of course. But I did not remotely think she was about to die. He did tell me later, and I'm very, very pleased, that she had read my review of Theatre Outside Athens in the TLS, which was one long piano praise to this remarkable piece of scholarship, and her team building, the way she built up this team to show us how much theatre culture there had been at the Western end of the Greek-speaking world in the classical period and into the Hellenistic times. When Clemente and I were approached, I did not hesitate for 1 second. I had become one of Kate's very greatest admirers, I think, and got close to her, surprisingly close, surprisingly quickly. And I also knew that she had been supervised by Ruth Scodel, who I'm delighted is with us here. And her passion, her absolute passion for theatre in all its forms, is something that I very much remember. It is so rare in classical scholars, bizarrely, despite the fact that we, are sitting on one of the greatest seams of evidence in the history of world theatre, and plays that are still in the repertoire, actually really loving and knowing about theatre. I sometimes think Oliver Taplin, and perhaps there were a couple of others, there was an Italian on Aristophanes, and there's Solomos in Greece, but actually getting good classical scholarship from people who really love theatre did not happen really until after Oliver's path-breaking book on the stagecraft of Aeschylus in the 1970s. So people who read that and loved that always tried to combine it. And it's no accident that Kate's book actually begins with a poem by Elizabeth Jennings on the magic of live theatre. And I found myself reading that during lockdown. Whenever my yearning for a live performance was overwhelming me, I would go back and read Kate's quotation of that poem. But of course, also by 3 or 4 pages into the introduction, we've gone from the intense importance and cultural thrills, the aesthetic beauty of theatre, to we've got Goebbels and Mussolini's cynical use of theatre for propaganda purposes. I mean, she knew an enormous amount about just the history of theatre and why it matters. And of course, why, as this book shows, and I think Clemente will talk a bit more about this, that of all the avenues into the ancient imagination and lifestyle and temperament, theatre history is the one that I think has the most tributaries and the most branches, to mix my metaphors. If you study the tree of theatre in antiquity, you'll end up doing philosophy, history, archaeology, art, poetry, aesthetics, religion, and everything. And I think Kate understood that better than anyone, and this book is such a model of that. So I was delighted that Clemente agreed, and it is absolutely a mark of how great a scholar she was that it required 2 people to edit a doctorate, because she is just as knowledgeable on the concrete stones being dug up in all these places that she did indeed go and visit herself. There was hardly a theatrical stone she didn't turn up in herself in Sicily and South Italy. And at the other end of the scale, she could tell you the difference between different kinds of literary Doric, like one dialect of Greek in the fragments of Epicharmus. So it took 2 of us even to begin to edit it. And in fact, in a sense, I want to be here to praise Kate. I don't think we did very much. We agreed very early on with Dale to let Kate's quite unique voice speak through. It was a long time ago now, but I can't remember doing much more than providing translations of untranslated Greek and Latin, of updating the bibliography as far as was possible, if really important new things had turned up, of glossing some words to make sure that, say, somebody interested in theatre history but with no particular specialist knowledge of ancient theatre. I don't remember doing any important work because it was so perfect as it was. And one of the things, rereading it over the weekend just now, that I most admire just about her style as a scholar is actually her writing. It is accessible, it is good-humoured, this bonhomous, jovial, friendly, warm, inclusive Kate that we all knew can be heard very clearly in this book. But she takes no prisoners. If she disagrees with someone, she will quietly and methodically take their argument apart and leave it with very few threads standing. The part of the book that I most admire intellectually, I mean, I admire all of it, but the part that I really, really rate, and I'm going back to all the time at the moment, because I've been working on philosophical dialogues of Plato and the lost philosophical dialogues of Aristotle, is her work on epicharmos and mime. And she saw that Epicharmos, who is one of the most important figures in all of ancient literary culture. I mean, there is no doubt about that. And she got that. And she put the arguments for why in a way that nobody's ever done before, fully and comprehensively. She makes extraordinarily good use of Andreas Willi's work on the actual language of what on earth would a Doric, literary Doric in Sicily look like. How is it different from Dorics that we know in other Greek literatures from other parts of the Greek world, or the Doric that we have in Athenian drama? And some of the results that she comes up from that are just extraordinary. I actually think that chapter 2 and parts of some of the later chapters together could have stood alone as a brilliant monograph, just showing us all why those of us who do not know the name of Epicharmos, without whom we might not even have had, Plato's uber influential prose dialogues. When we read any kind of philosophical dialogue at all, then we are really going back to the Sicilian Epicharmos and his tradition. I'm going to hand over to Clemente in a minute. The other things I want to say was that her eye for an artwork, an important art, was enviable. There are some pictures in this, and this is one of the reasons it's taken so long to get together, was because some of them are in such obscure little tiny provincial museums that it's been really taken a very long time to get permissions together, despite extraordinarily hard work, not only by Clemente and help from the great Australian Greek vase experts, all of them, but also Michael Sharp at CUP. And for example, the amazing Sicilian calyx crater from Jebel Gabid, showing Dionysus actually in the footwear of an actor, followed by, guess what, Demeter. And her judicious chapter on the cults of Demeter and why we can't too quickly assume that there was any actual literary theatre tradition attached to them is, although far, it's more of a negative hypothesis, but it's incredibly valuable and beautifully argued. So I think this book is of remarkable importance. Kate picked up very well and very sensitively, probably the first North American scholar so to do, on the work by Oliver, Eric Sarpo and Peter Wilson. Also, a lot of that was coming out originally from some path-breaking work by Pat Easterling on theatre beyond the 5th century. But the way that theatre needs to be thought about, not just as having a single centre in Athens, she completely poo-poos and very comically and wittily, the Athens was the Hollywood of the ancient theatre world, very, very well, and says we've got to take these people on their own terms. And that has had lasting impact because it was the success of the theatre outside Athens book that really got me and David Braun's and Rosie Wiles determined to do something similar with the Black Sea. So she was an inspiring example, this young woman on her own, right, taking on this massive thing and deciding that she was going to run a whole conference and then, typically, unselfishly, put her own monograph on a back burner, which is why it wasn't completed by her as it should have been. And it would probably have been a much better book. I mean, it's a very, very good book, but it would have been a better book if she had edited it herself than if Clemente and I had, obviously. Also, the idea that these regional theatres weren't just mirrors of Athens, but were doing creative things of their own. So it was much more of a dialectic, much more of a dialogue between so-called centre and periphery. It's much more of a dialogue between a polycentric theatre industry, which, as I say, we also now have documented all the way to the Eastern Black Sea. It's very sad indeed. It was very sad indeed for us with our Black Sea book, which is also an archive of performances related, but with a podcast attached to it. It was very sad that she was going to give the keynote at our conference saying what lessons she'd learned from studying theatre in the West. Could some of the theoretical and methodological lessons help us as we sailed through the Hellespont and up into the Black Sea to look for evidence from theatre there? And of course, she died before she could do that. And Oliver heroically, at the last minute, and graciously gave the keynote at that, for which we were all eternally grateful. The last thing I'm going to say, though, is that Kate actually is the reason why the faces you're going to see today, are actually talking. Certainly, Kate came to me, as she had done to Oliver. She came to me. She invited me with Marianne Upman when they were both young lecturers appointed by Sara Monoson with her great, brilliant human resources nose for great staff. She invited me, I can't even remember, something like 2007 or 6, over to Northwestern. As a result of that, I got very immediately identified that Sara Monoson was going to be a staunch ally of all the projects going off in Britain. And so Sara has been a consultant on my Classics in Class project. I've been a consultant on the Classics in Chicago. There are these huge, strong bonds between Justine and other people at the archive. And this whole transatlantic nexus comes down to this one woman. And Patrice is also part of the same whole interest in reception that we started to share between the USA, although Kate was Canadian, and is actually very funny in the book about how being Canadian might have affected her looking at theatre outside the metropole. It's one of the best pages in the book. So she's still with us now. The fact we're together today is down to her. I think I've got to know Ruth Scodel as well. I've made more of, I very much wanted to get to know Ruth because of Kate. So thank you, Kate, wherever you are, because your influence lives on in our intellectual community, even though sadly, we don't have you with us to talk to directly. Thank you. I think I would like to hand over to Clemente now.
Thank you, Edith, for your wonderful words. Thank you to Oliver for the introduction. Indeed, Kate is with us today, and we think of her. I personally had the pleasure of meeting her more than once, and a memorable one was at Northwestern. She was working on transforming the manuscript into a book, she wanted to exchange ideas with an expert in the archaeology of Sicily. And so we did for 2 days. They were very intense, and I was very fortunate to admire the brightness of Kate and her splendid personality. And it has been really a privilege to contribute to the publication of the volume. And I have learned so much from Kate in reading the manuscript the first time, and then in going over it for the publication. And as Edith has commented before, there was not so much for us to do because the manuscript was perfect. It needed some update in terms of literature and new finds, but it was perfect. It was perfect in content, and it is perfect in terms of the very particular line of argumentation by Kate, which is very rigorous and in many ways exemplary. Now, this is obviously the ultimate book about theaters in Sicily. Each chapter is about a different aspect of this phenomenon. And the first one is about, after an introduction, is about Epicharmus. Epicharmus is one of my favorite authors. And this is definitely, like Edith pointed out, really the best treatment of Epicharmus that we have today. And the volume, so that's the first chapter. And the last one is actually about stone theaters in the West and particularly in Sicily. And behind me in the background, as a tribute to Kate, there is the theater at Singesta. And in between the discussion of Epicharmus and the discussion of stone theaters in the island, there is so much thinking and discussing the various aspects of drama, its connection with the cult, whether Dionysos or Demeter or other deities. And then, of course, at the center, there's this discussion of the central argument, the importance of tyranny. Probably they would have talked of themselves as monarchs, but we refer to them as tyrants. Anyhow, the importance of tyranny for the phenomenon of theater in Sicily. And this is true of the 5th century, and Kate makes a similar argument also for later periods. And then last but not least, there is a chapter about images of theater, representations of drama in the visual arts of the West, with a particular attention for Sicily. Now, as I said, there was very little to update, but I was very happy to be in time to add the new discovery of the theater in Agrigento, which is one of the most important news about the theater in the past, past few years. The theater of Agrigento has been identified only a couple of years ago and is being excavated. But anyhow, I would like to say we had little to add to the manuscript, except for such updates. And my point is this is not only a comprehensive discussion of the various aspects related to theater in the West, and particularly Sicily, is also, and this is really my main point, an example of interdisciplinary work. And Edith pointed this out before. I mean, it took a specialist in literary text and a specialist in material culture to edit the manuscript for publication. And this is because Kate made the miracle of bridging these two fields, which tend to be too distant from time to time. Obviously, there is a long tradition that goes back to the 19th century about the relationship between Veses and drama in the West, for sure, but definitely when it comes to architecture, that Kate discusses so in detail in the last chapter. Well, the discussion of the theatrical structures, like the theater in Segesta behind me, is really mostly by specialists of architecture, with a particular interest in design. And when it comes to other aspects, is more about the dating, whether the date to the Greek period or to the transformation, to the time of the transformation of Sicily into a Roman province, or to issues of patronage. But very little is done in trying to connect these buildings with performances and the literary record. So my point is not only this is going to be an essential book for anyone working on the theater in Sicily, and the various types of documentation. But this is also a model of interdisciplinary approach, which is so much needed for our field, and where Kate, the importance of Kate work shines particularly. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you both, Edith and Clemente. And we have with us also Ruth Scodel, who was the supervisor of Kate's doctorate at University of Michigan at Ann Arbor. So I hope we've got the technology to bring up Ruth for a contribution.
Well, I seem to be unmuted, although I can't start video. So other people, now maybe there, start. Okay. Other people have indulged in anecdotes, so I will tell two quick ones. One was the moment I decided Kate fit the best Canadian stereotypes more than anyone I'd ever met. After she won a national championship in single sculls in, I think, 2004, and didn't tell anybody around the department. And someone found out by accident. When I asked why she hadn't told anyone, she said, oh, well, it wasn't really that important because so many of the best rowers didn't come this year because they're waiting for the Olympics trials. I thought, it's a national championship, you know? Anyway, that was Kate. Another moment I remember with deep affection when she came back from her first research trip in Sicily and southern Italy and said to me that people had told her that it could be difficult getting to see items in storage, particularly in those tiny museums that Edith referred to. And she had just had a wonderful experience. Everywhere she went, the museum guards had been as friendly and helpful as you can imagine. And I remember just looking at Kate, this tall, blonde, very pretty, and herself extraordinarily friendly looking woman, and thought, you know, Kate, I don't think you have any idea the impression you're probably making on a bored museum guard at a tiny provincial museum somewhere in Sicily. It was lovely. Anyway, what fascinated me about Kate's work, I think from the beginning, was that in the 90s, it seemed to me that the study of ancient drama was very weirdly split. On the one hand, you had the influence of the new historicism leading people to do all this very interesting scholarship on tragedy in particular, but other drama also, as a very peculiarly Athenian and democratic phenomenon. And there was a great deal of this. Much of it was excellent, but there it was. And on the other side, you had the new and growing interest in reception. And it seemed to me that we were in a kind of schizophrenic place because it was very difficult to see how you got from this Athena-centric theater to something that was adapted in very different places over very extensive periods of time. And what I loved about the way Kate's project developed, which Edith also referred to when she talked about Kate's attention to the specifics of the Doric, of Epicharmus, was that in moving away from the Atheno-centric model, she held very fast to the reality that theater is always local. You know, it's of its nature that you perform in a particular place in front of particular people and for particular purposes. So her emphasis on the tyrants was the perfect corrective to the fantasy that somehow theater was inevitably going to be democratic, which is not what people who worked say, Tragedy and Athenian Democracy said, but it would have been very easy to slip into that attitude. And Kate's story about theater in Sicily is grounded in Sicily. And that's another really profoundly useful reminder methodologically that transmission is not planned. Local traditions absorb traditions from other places and then make them their own. And Kate's reading is just amazingly rich. So thank you, Kate. I miss you. I got the Grange finally to take down the photo of Kate at her wedding that had been in the basement where we have Grange meetings for years, because I had this stab of sorrow every month when I went to open the Grange meeting. I still think of her all the time, but it's not quite as sudden as it was at the Grange. Thank you, Kate.
Thank you, Ruth. And quite rightly, the scholar and the person so indivisible. And we have a more directly personal contributions now, because Kate's mother, Cecil, and Kate's husband, Dale, are both with us for this occasion. And I would like to hand over to them for what they have to tell us about Kate. So Cecil, are you there?
Yes, hello. Has asked you to start your video. Okay. Hello. Hello, hello, hello.
Yes, it's all right. We're with you.
Oh, terrific. So you can hear me.
Yes, yes.
Well, yes. I just want to say some very simple things about Kate, which is that she was really born into an academic family. Her father was a professor of European history, and I graduated from UBC, University of British Columbia, with a degree in theater. Kate was a very outgoing and generous person in herself. When she was tiny, when she was 2 and she was nursing, she patted my breast and said, "No more milk, Mommy, not for me. It's for the baby." And the baby was her brother, whom she looked after as long as she lived. At 5, she said, "Mommy, I'm not going to be like you. I'm going to be like Daddy. I'm going to be an academic and I'm not going to clean the kitchen." And she nevertheless was in the thrall of the theater all her life. When she was 5 and 6, she invited all her girlfriends over to the garden, gave them old gowns that came from a costume box, and put on a play. She went to a school where her Latin teacher, for whom she wrote plays in Latin, inspired her to study classics at the University of Toronto. And by great good luck, her professor was Eric Chapo, who channeled her interest in Greece and theater to Western Greece, Magna Graecia. And Kate and I went to Sicily because her father wouldn't let her go alone for 6 weeks in 2001 to explore 18 Greek theaters. And one of the theater activities she had during her University of Toronto work was a fellow scholar called Greg Robick, who put on Aristophanes and Clouds and the Assembly Women at the Poor Alex Theatre, which is a downtown theatre in Toronto. And Kate was part of that. And before Kate left the University of Toronto, she herself put on Euripides' Orestes on a green lawn on a summer night. It was wonderful. And I wanted to read you Professor Chapo's little paragraph to me about Kate. He said, it was through the history of the ancient theater that she became interested in topics like regional theater in Greece. I do remember one day, it must have been early in her final year at the University of Toronto, that she asked to come to my office after a class to discuss topics in ancient theater for graduate work. I asked about what interested her, and with just a little nudging, she found the topic of classical theater in the Greek West. As a topic, it had at that time received little previous attention and seemed to me to have brilliant potential. I am personally very proud of what she has done with it. She did pioneering work in a field that has since become fashionable, but her edited book of 2012 has been up till now the gold standard. I am only sorry it took so long, and so on. So it was a very happy event that Professor Chapo encouraged her. I said to a friend of mine, I said, what can I say about Kate? She replied, just ask Kate and then listen for her answer. So I sat in my favorite chair, which I'm sitting in right now, and got out a bag of cheesies, which is a product of Canada. And I said, Kate, what should I say? And I heard her laughing. She said, that's just what I would do. Eat cheesies and wait for an answer. So Kate is here and doesn't want to be forgotten. And I want to thank you for all the kindnesses that you've done to her. And I know that she is as grateful as I am. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cecil, and thank you all for joining us, everyone participating and everyone who is watching this over the web and watching this at a later date. My name is LaDale Winling, and I had the joy and honor of being Kate's husband for 7 years. And now I have the primary responsibility of raising our son, Ernest. I'll say that I knew that Kate was special from the moment I met her. It was at a rowing club in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and it was just kind of like a end of summer, beginning of fall, kind of like barbecue get together. It was before, about 2 weeks before my first day of graduate school, and Kate was already a candidate. And I met her and realized or saw that she had like extremely developed upper arms and in fact had veins showing on her biceps, which I knew from spending time with athletes was a sign of like extreme, development or fitness. Like this was a woman who was an excellent athlete in rowing in that case. So began talking to her, and then she said that she was a PhD candidate in classics at the University of Michigan. And I thought, my goodness, this is unbelievable. It's first to meet someone who is so, kind of like finely tuned for athletics and who is working at the very top levels of academic life. Struck me immediately as one of a kind, and devoted the rest of the next several months to wooing her. And it was right. I think I had the similar experience in a different form that so many people who've talked today had about Kate, which is to understand in just a moment of interaction how extraordinary she was, and I think in multiple realms of life, whether it was bringing together literature and archaeology in the study of ancient theater, or whether it's combining top level, like international quality athletic pursuits, as well as kind of intrepid, adventurous, and indefatigable research in classics and theater. And so my experience with her over our year and a half of courtship, and 7 years of marriage, and then kind of subsequent legacy after her passing, has been, to kind of reflect upon, right? Like a woman who is, like, in some ways, in both like physically and kind of emotionally and spiritually, like made of steel in a sense. She both had a will of steel and was able to kind of turn that into like a really unbelievable feats of endurance, like personal perseverance, as well as those of athletic pursuits. So as Ruth Scodel had mentioned, in 2004, just about 6 weeks before we met, she had won the US National Championship for sculling. And while it was not the Olympic trials and she would not have been eligible to compete for the United States, that same year she won the Royal Canadian Henley US Single Women's Championship, which was kind of their functionally their national championship. And right, basically the absolute top level of achievement. And in fact, in the US National Championships, she beat a woman from Mexico who was subsequently that very same summer a medalist in the Olympic finals. But in all of our years together, she never once brought up that she had won these championships or had been a schoolgirl in the Canadian junior national team, without having someone else always had to bring that up or ask her about it or something along these lines, because her modesty was so profound. And I think that kind of modesty was fundamental to her level of achievement, right? Like she never rested on her laurels, never was satisfied with whatever she achieved. There was always, right, like more to do and some new challenge to kind of pursue. And that kind of will of steel kind of enabled that. I would also say, in the travels that we had in Italy and Sicily, she was an indefatigable researcher. So she kind of fell in love with antiquity in her teens in 1991, as when she kind of first visited these European sites of antiquity. In 2001, in graduate school, took a trip with Cecil to visit so many sites, and then together we traveled in Sicily in 2007, 2009, and 2011. And really, there was no train station too far from a suspected or potential theater site that we could not walk in the wilting sun, in some cases for multiple kilometers, to kind of get out to the site, because she had to see it. And in the course of this, she kind of retraced the steps and the work of Italian archaeologists and so many other scholars, because it was important to her to kind of physically retrace those routes, to make those connections, and to kind of capture that information in her experience in order to be able to do justice to the intellectual work and write about it. But then I also want to say she had an exceptional kind of ethic of care, and especially care for others. So in those trips that we took, right, it was always a priority to visit the open air markets, to kind of find whole, fresh food that was, prepared in the most simple and nutritious fashion, first for me, any guests that we might be hosting, and eventually for our son. And there was really no kind of effort or expense. There was no limit to the kind of effort that she would put into caring for others. I think as a way of probably accounting for or counterbalancing that kind of like forceful, steely will and effort that she put forth in these kind of, competitive and intellectually demanding pursuits. And so that kind of relationship between, right, kind of like a will of steel, the indefatigable and adventurous intellectual and research life that she had, coupled with and kind of held together by that ethic of care, was key to my experience with Kate. And I got to see her enact this in so many ways. I have a PhD and we were in graduate school at the same time and have kind of continued my own academic life. And I'm still, stunned and trying to live up to that kind of standard of both interpersonal care as well as like research ambition that was, that has brought us both the book and the kind of experiences that have connected us all now and in the course of her academic career. With that said, I want to thank you and hand off to Justine and Patrice to talk about their collaborations.
Thanks so much, Dale. And perhaps it's with Kate's ethic of care that one has to begin, really, because it was so intertwined with the way she was. So I was lucky enough to be a postdoc on Kate's Classicizing Chicago project, which Sara Monoson will tell us a bit more about in a moment. But whether I was apple picking with Kate and Dale, or going to theatre around Chicago with Kate, or working particularly on the theatre aspect of Classicizing Chicago together, Kate was very much an academic mentor, but also a friend, and the two together. And Fiona Macintosh, Patrice, Rankine, and I had the great pleasure and the honor of editing the Oxford Handbook of Greek Drama in the Americas with Kate. And we each wanted to say just a few words about that now. Because the roots of that handbook were in the Sawyer Seminar series entitled Theatre After Athens, that ran, and we've heard a bit about this, but ran from 2008 to 2010 at Northwestern, following Kate's successful application to the Mellon Foundation. And that series focused on two main aspects, really: how Athenian drama was received and adapted in antiquity, and also in the United States since independence. And from the series grew two edited collections. So Theatre Outside Athens, that we've seen and we've heard a little bit about, published by Cambridge University Press in 2012, that Kate edited on her own. And then also the Oxford Handbook of Greek Drama in the Americas, published in 2015, that Fiona, Patrice, and I were so lucky to be able to co-edit with Kate. And as well as that, the Classicizing Chicago project that, as I say, Sara will say a little bit more about, and that I worked on as a postdoc. Now, in addition to the book, Greek Theatre in Ancient Sicily, that we're really celebrating here today, this is an astonishing array of research outcomes demonstrating just what a talented and original scholar Kate was, as everyone is saying. And it leaves us only to imagine the exciting directions that she would have taken the discipline of classics, were she still here. And for those of us who knew Kate and worked with Kate, it's a further reminder of how grateful we are to have had that opportunity to work with her. And I know that we all, and particularly as these editors, all feel very lucky to have known Kate. So to turn to the Oxford Handbook of Greek Drama in the Americas, Kate was really the driving force of this book. It was her vision, and she brought us all together as editors and I think as contributors. And if editing a book is an act of curation, akin to curating an exhibition, it's also like organizing a dinner party. It's a delicate balance of making sure that everyone and their chapters cohere, get on, kind of speak to each other in a sense, and that they're integrally included. And as well as Kate's immense intellectual acumen, it's that broad and sensitive vision that she instilled in the handbook, and that we, both contributors and editors, so appreciated. And as we thought about how we wanted to structure this book, we realized that while the seminars that she'd set up had given us a really necessary focus, they'd also provided us with the foundations to take some important next steps. So the book would embrace the Americas, not comprehensively, but a taster, if you will, of some of the key aspects. And this was crucial because what becomes apparent when you look at the reception of Greek drama in the Americas is that there are networks and connections across the region that mean that the performance arts in the Americas have so often defied national boundaries. The result is that the Handbook spans from the 19th century up to 2015 across the Americas, including Canada, Latin America, and the Caribbean, as well as the United States, and including 2 interviews with theatre practitioners, such as Derek Walcott, Anne Carson, Peter Sellers, and Hector Levy-Daniel. And perhaps it's on that kind of expansion across the Americas and to theatre practitioners, something that hadn't been being done so much in the field of classical reception, that I'll hand over to Patrice now to say a few words as well.
Thank you, Justine. I think you said it so well, and I'm just really grateful to be able to be part of today, to bear witness to what I experienced with Kate and this volume. I didn't know her, I think, as well as many people on the call. I had met her in 2010, I believe it was, when the conference took place. But I also just will corroborate this sense of warmth and attentiveness that I saw in her, which actually is not as common among academicians as we might think. We tend to be in our world, we tend to be in our work. The word excellence has come up a lot. And in Kate's case, she was at the top of her game. And in many cases, I was part of a learning process. So Kate brought together this conference. We see that on the one hand, we had Classicizing Chicago that Kate was developing. And so the book is in a way anchored into this sort of local experience in Chicago and Hull House and classics in Chicago. But at the same time, as Justine just pointed out, it has this reverberance beyond the city. So as you've been hearing throughout the day, we have this sense of a kind of anchor in the local, but how that anchor in the local reverberates and extends beyond one place. And those places become patchworks. They begin to speak to each other in really remarkable ways. And that was the work of the Oxford Handbook of Greek Drama in the Americas. And you really have Kate's spirit in that when you think about its reach into Canada, its interest in the performance of Greek drama in Canada, its interest in the United States, and then also its reach beyond the borders of the United States into Latin America, Brazil, but then also Spanish-speaking Latin America. From my perspective, what was really challenging was her invitation to think about the African contributions to the performance of Greek drama in the Americas. There was a whole panel to which I was invited on Black drama, classical reception within the Black authors, African-American authors, but also authors who were interested in locating Greek drama in the Caribbean, in African-American context within the United States, and so on. We've heard a little bit about team building. That team included people like Daniel Banks, Sandra Richards, Kevin Wetmore, and then of course, I was invited into that. Let me just end here by saying a little bit back to what I was pointing to earlier in terms of excellence. This was a growing experience for me. I was not expert in Greek drama, in the performance of Greek drama among African Americans. My work was in literature. And I came to the conference with that very literary perspective. And what I found in interacting with the team, getting to know Kate's work and getting to know what we were doing together there, was a sense of performance, interest and curiosity about pure performance theory that I hadn't had before that point. Kate's really responsible for my sense that I had to go back and think not only about Greek drama as literature, but in the way Professor Taplin does, to think about it as performative, to think about it in terms of what it might mean as performed and what it might mean for a African-American performative context to take that on. So that was really, again, not only now classics beyond Athens, but classics beyond Aristotle, beyond the literary reception that we might have in Athens. So that was the second aspect of it, not just the performative, but also the notion that while we might have an August Wilson who is interested in Aristotle per se and looking at Greek drama as Aristotle, that Kate was allowing us to open that up a little bit beyond the Aristotelian reception to think about performance and what that might mean, what it might mean to look at performance outside of Athens within a performative context in the New World and in the modern and contemporary worlds. So again, Kate is excellent, was excellent, but she also pushed us toward a kind of excellence, toward growth and development. And we see that in my work. We see it in the work of those of us who have worked with her on McCall, but then also it shines through in the Oxford Handbook of Greek Drama in the Americas, which absolutely was her brainchild and inspired by her. So I'm really pleased to be part of this, really thankful for the opportunity to remember Kate today with you.
I want to join my co-editors in celebrating and remembering all of Kate's modesty, her extraordinary resilience. I remember those editorial meetings when I definitely didn't realize that our fellow editor was as seriously ill as she was. The camera wasn't on, but we were all on the call together. And her resilience, her generosity of spirit, and above all, as I think we've heard in so many ways, her ability to bring people together. And like Patrice, like Justine, I learned so much from the experience of editing the Oxford Handbook of Greek Drama in the Americas. It enabled me, someone who had worked very much, as many of you will know, with Edith Hall over a number of years on Greek tragedy in Britain. And I had to completely rethink many of the paradigms I worked with, as Kate, at her invitation, invited me to think about Greek drama from a North American perspective. I learned from her, I learned above all in the last years, the last few months rather, of the editorial experience from both Justine and Patrice. And one thing I think we've all realized is her ability to build networks and the legacy of those networks, the very close friendships that have come out of the conferences she organized, and in our case, the book that she invited us to edit. And one great pleasure for the APGRD and everyone who's a part of it has been our connection with Northwestern. And this is the moment, I think, when we, if Oliver permits me, I will hand over to Kate's dear colleague that we've heard of already, Sara Monoson, because thanks to Kate and the Classicizing Chicago project, the APGRD have been able to continue to work with Northwestern. And I think Sara is going to share some of the project and hopefully some of the future plans as well. So over to Sara.
Hi, thank you, everybody. What a terrific day this is. I'm going to try not to be too repetitive. So much of the wondrous aspects of Kate as a scholar, as a colleague, as a friend, as a human being has really come out in this conversation. And I'm grateful to be reliving, to have her vicariously or virtually present. I wanted to start with a couple of anecdotes, since those were how we started in the beginning. I was the chair of the department when we searched, when we conducted the search that brought Kate to Northwestern. And I think, like Dale, we knew instantly that there was something really extraordinary about her. It wasn't just that she was a philologist and a historian and an expert in material culture. She also had an agenda. It's very unusual for a scholar at such a beginning of a career to really have a sense of what they want to try to introduce into the scholarly community, how they want to sort of be part of pushing forward new areas of research. They, you know, obviously a good dissertation makes a great contribution, but the expansive sense of an agenda that Kate had was really extraordinary. And we've heard already today about how much that had to do with her understanding of performance and theater outside Athens, with her work on ancient theater and her work on ancient theater in performance in the Americas and all. I want to identify that she also had this sense, and this is the Class Size in Chicago project. She also had this, in addition to those other items, she had the sense, a very interesting insight that could be useful in pushing forward some new methodological innovations in reception studies. She was familiar with, and we're all familiar with, the reception history of ancient drama, moving to Sicily, moving to, you know, being adapted in North American and African and other contexts. But Kate wanted to also see the performance history in as part of the reception of antiquity more broadly. And she wanted to be able to understand how what was unique about or interesting about the theater reception in the context of how any kind of cultural environment was engaging with the cultural productions of Greece and Rome more generally. And she understood that this was a massive and unwieldy undertaking, but she had the brilliant insight that if she worked in a specific locale, some very, picked a geographical location, she could find some boundaries that would enable her to sort of do that. So that was the genesis of the original Classicizing Chicago project. She thought, let's look at the reception of Greece and Rome in Chicago culture in a defined period of time. Let's look at as many media as possible. In other words, ancient art, ancient philosophy, ancient rhetoric, ancient building examples, and all sorts of. Let's look at it in a bounded Chicago, and also, of course, ancient theater on the Chicago stages was a part of that. And let's look at it there. And she had the insight that that could generate research questions having to do with patterns, having to do with longitudinal patterns. What correlations could we find with the history of particular performances on Chicago stages in particular moments? What did they correlate with in the particular, what was going on in Chicago? How far could those moments of reception of Greece and Rome be part of Chicago artists and activists and people in all sorts of media? How far could they turn to ancient examples to try to articulate specifically local Chicago ambitions and ideals, and to express sort of Chicago ambitions for itself as a global metropolis? So its engagement, so Chicago cultural products across a wide variety of media became something that she was really, really interested in. And we have tried to take up, now, Kate's own contribution to this project was massive, and she worked very closely with Dale, who is, among other things, very good at all sorts of digital humanities kinds of things. And we had a very early in the sort of movement towards digital humanities effort to try to build a electronic presence for this Classicizing Chicago project. And the first part of that was something modeled very much on the APGRD. Kate built a database of performances of Greek and Roman drama on the Chicago stages, starting from the 1840s, the earliest things that she could find, and going up until until the end of her life. We've tried to take on keeping it up to date and going forward. And that searchable database is something that still exists, and that we have the ambitions to move to collaborate with the APGRD and make it electronically accessible to the users of the archive there. The pandemic unfortunately slowed down that process of transferring it, because all the people in IT became extremely overworked and overburdened. So that will hopefully go forward later. I'd like to share a screen and show you. This is our website for classical antiquity in metropolitan Chicago. In the middle there, the Atlas feature is something that Kate didn't herself develop, but that we developed very much in her spirit, which is that's what we call our collection of engagements with classical antiquity across all sorts of different media, not just in theater. Kate's very close friend, Francesca Tattarani, very much inspired by Kate, developed a project called Ancient Rome in Chicago, where this is really mostly about the built-in environment. And it was very much inspired, I think, by Kate's determination to, as Dale said, see every site carefully and look at the local environment and exploit every observation that you can make to try to make an interesting story about what there is to be learned there. But I want to call our attention to something that we now call the Bosher Collection. It wasn't obviously originally called that. We've chosen to call it that in honor of Kate. But this is the searchable database of Greek and Roman drama in Chicago stages. I hope you can all see this. This is just one image. The collection has a tremendous amount of information about, it's not just a list of the performances, but it has a tremendous amount of detail, including digitized images and all sorts of, I should just say as a side note here, working with this was like a lesson in the rapid transformation of digital technology, because one of the greatest difficulties we had was that Dale and Kate worked together to make this searchable database on a platform. It was a tremendous amount of labor. Josh Hahn at the University Library and others were enormously helpful. And it was very useful. And then, of course, the platform became obsolete, and we had to then migrate it onto another platform and then migrate. So it's become so in the interest of trying to make it more permanently accessible, we're interested in collaborating with the APGRD to make that there. So the Classicizing Chicago project is very much still going on. We are looking always for people to join us and to take on investigations in Chicago. There have been many students, graduate students, fellow faculty, colleagues from other institutions that have contributed to it. I hope that some of you in the audience will peruse the website to take a look. And I'm just going to share my screen here. We've been talking so much about Kate. Here, let's just, I wanted to just make sure to put the picture up.
Sarah, sorry to interrupt, but we're not actually getting the screen share.
You're not getting the screen share. Oh, I wish you had said that sooner. Okay, hold on. Let me, is it sharing now?
It is.
Okay, well, I will just go back. This is the website that you can see the features that I was mentioning. and go into the Bosher collection here. And just bring up a portrait of Kate. One thing I would like to do here is sort of make a call out to folks. This is a very rich and a full collection of material of Greek and Roman drama on the Chicago stage from the 1840s, and we're up to date to close to into the I think probably around 2015, 2018. But up to that point, with this bounded collection, it's remarkably comprehensive and has a lot of detail. It's a collection that is ready for a sharp postgraduate to jump into and to mine. And I hope all of those who are listening will think of themselves, their own interests, their own students, and that we can see this research collection sort of generate some scholarship of its own. It's also very useful for public outreach and for communicating to the general public things about the continuing interest in adaptations of Greek and Roman drama in contemporary times. So I guess what I would like to just say, I guess in closing, is what a fabulous privilege it was to be a colleague of Kate's. I'd like to say that when we welcomed her to Northwestern, she had so much energy and so many ideas. It was kind of hard to keep up with her. She was a marvelous teacher. Her students adored her. She involved them in performances. She got colleagues to do all sorts of goofy dress up things with pleasure and delight. The thrill and the passion for theater in its most scholarly and particular and form, and in its most hilarious kind of personal performative way. She was equally at home in both of those, especially when she was in the classroom and working with her students. So as a colleague, as her chair, watching the ways in which she was contributing to the community, both the large scholarly community in its broadest sense, and also very much her local community, and making a tremendous impact on the people that she interacted with on a daily basis. I also want to just put on the record here is that the Sawyer Seminar, the Mellon-funded conference that many people have referred to as being a really pivotal moment, when Kate brought the scholarly agenda of both looking at theater outside Athens in antiquity and theater adaptations of Greek drama in the Americas. That conference itself, I think it's worth saying, was an extraordinary accomplishment. We've all been to great conferences. We all have, and this was one. But what Kate did, and this is those of you who have, in the academic world, I sent a simple message around saying the deadline for applying for the Mellon Sawyer funds is coming up. The dean asks, does anybody have any ideas? Right. And of course, this is a message that went to the entire arts and science, I think all the social sciences and the humanities departments. Kate came up and said, I have an idea. And she had this idea for the conference worked out in her head. She knew that she wanted to try to bring these communities together to think about these things. And the Sawyer Seminar application was a real opportunity because it was a very large amount of money. And it was able to bring a dozen more people to Northwestern for multiple days on different occasions over the course of, of a couple of years and work on these projects. And Kate was a driving force behind that intellectually and personally. She nurtured those relationships. The fact that multiple volumes came out of one conference is really a great testament to that. So I should say that her application was the very first Sawyer Seminar application that Northwestern as an institution was successful in obtaining. So Kate was also really great for getting us good press in the in the dean's office. I don't know who I'm handing it off to here. I wonder if Dale has anything that he would like to add about the Classicized in Chicago project, since you, Dale, were also a driving force. And I should, but otherwise, we're to Oliver. So thank you all for coming together today.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Sarah. Dale, would you like to say something? Or shall we leave it there?
Okay.
Yeah, thanks very much, Sarah. This has been, as Edith said right at the beginning, a very bittersweet occasion. And I would just like to add one more piece of bittersweetness, which is just to show you that also this very, I think, very moving photo of Kate and of Justine picking apples, which has become the frontispiece of the Oxford Companion to the Oxford Handbook to Greek Drama in the Americas. What strikes me is something about Kate's energy, which Cecil said was apparent already when she was 5 years old, and what Dale called the element of steel in her. What strikes me is that all these years later, after her death, her energy still runs through us. It runs through us, and it runs through the projects that we do, and runs through the work that we do, to which her contribution is so important. That is a way of keeping her memory green. And I hope that everybody agrees that this meeting we've had today to celebrate her Greek theatre in ancient Sicily and to celebrate her memory is an appropriate way of showing how her energy still runs through our work. So I'd like to say thank you very much to all of you who have contributed, and best wishes to everyone.